Autumn had always been a time when the world grew hazy, as if the veil between reality and something ominous became thinner. The leaves, crunching beneath my feet, played more than a decorative role. They were the heralds of something about to happen. I didn't think much of it that evening. By that time, the sky had already started to darken, and the air grew colder with each passing moment, as if the day was slipping away into thick clouds. But there was something different about this evening. The wind, sharp and biting, skimmed my face, a reminder of forgotten things, the sort of things one doesn't think about in the bustle of daily life. I tried to clear my head, to think of how things weren't as bad as they seemed. But in moments like that, when you stop paying attention to your surroundings, something inexplicable begins to weigh on you. The park was empty. No one was on the paths, no one among the trees. It always had an unsettling feeling. Old trees, their bare branches reaching for the sky like skeletal arms, gray, worn-out benches that no one sat on. Even the dogs seemed to avoid it. I passed by the park's lake, the water black as glass. By then, the autumn fog was thickening, and the darkening night began to swallow everything, like a heavy blanket, eager to swallow me whole. That's when I saw him. He stood on the path, right at the edge of the avenue, between towering trees, a strange man staring at me without blinking. At first glance, he might have seemed like an old loner wandering the park, but something about him was off. He was dressed in shabby, worn-out clothes, as though they had been worn and discarded 1,000 times over, like they were part of him, inseparable. His face was gray, almost deathly pale, with an unhealthy pallor, and his eyes were not human. They were cold, like the sky before a storm, and they pierced me as he watched. But what disturbed me most was his posture. One arm was bent awkwardly at his side, hidden behind his back. He held it there as if he were concealing something, and his gaze, steady and intense, didn't leave me for a second. It felt like he was waiting for something, waiting for me. My heart quickened. I knew I should just walk past him, ignore him, but something kept me there. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it. A sense that something wasn't right, that he wasn't just a madman lost in the park. He was waiting for me. "You're not alone." His voice was strange, hoarse, like the years had stolen its warmth. But each word echoed in my head, lingering longer than it should have. "We're all here. You're not alone." I took a step back. His words were nonsensical, but they unsettled me as if he knew something I didn't. And then, in the blink of an eye, he moved. His hand shot out from behind his back. I barely had time to register the flash of metal before the cold steel of a knife pressed against my stomach. He drew it so quickly that I didn't even have a chance to react. My body froze, too shocked to respond, but my mind screamed. This wasn't just some maniac. This was something else. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered slowly, turning the knife in his hand as though admiring it. I didn't immediately understand what he was saying, but something in his voice made it clear this wasn't just a man with a blade. There was something older in his tone. Something far more ancient and unsettling than I could grasp. But it wasn't just him that made me afraid. It was what I sensed lurking around us. The park had grown still, too still. No wind, no sound. The rustling leaves had stopped moving, as if frozen in time. The birds had fallen silent. I turned my head, trying to figure out what was happening. And that's when I saw them. The shadows. Shadows that seemed to grow out of the ground, stretching unnaturally toward me. They moved like living things, creeping and crawling in ways that didn't belong in the world I knew, and they were coming for me. I realized I had to run. My heart hammered in my chest as I bolted, the sound of my footsteps, the only thing I could hear over the pounding in my ears. The darkness seemed to close in on me, and with every step, I felt like I was running through a world that wasn't real anymore. The park felt endless, and as I glanced back, I saw that the man had not moved. He stood there, his knife raised, his eyes fixed on me, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. But worse than the man was what followed him. The shadows, like a wave, began to chase me, faster now, their forms undulating and stretching, moving with the rhythm of some ancient hunger. When I finally burst out onto the well-lit avenue, I stumbled to a halt. Silence. The shadows were gone. The man was gone. I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind racing. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no sign of him, no sign of the shadows, just the dull hum of the city in the distance. But something still lingered. A feeling that I wasn't alone. A feeling that no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, something was watching. Something was waiting. I turned around once more, my breath catching in my throat. And then, in the far distance, I saw him. The man, standing just beyond the edge of the park, his eyes locked on me. The faintest smile twisted his lips. I realized then he had never left. It didn't matter how fast I ran, the shadow was always there, lurking, stretching, just beyond the corner of my vision, and I knew that no matter where I went, it would follow. Because once the shadow finds you, it never lets go.